Welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin, and today's topic is past, future, and the present. And really, what we're going to talk about is our experience of time and timelessness and the mutability of reality. So it should be a really fun conversation. But before we get started, let's just take a couple minutes to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop. And allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning, Rosalind. So good to have you joining us this morning. And welcome to everybody else who's with us. We're talking today about past, future, and the present moment. And we're going to explore kind of a radical notion of time because I've been digging into this with my clients lately and also with myself. And if we can recognize that our past resides in story, our future resides in story, our present, I should have probably just called this today's conversation story, but our present resides in story. We as human beings are story making machines, meaning making machines, not machines, but we're meaning making magicians, so shall we say. And the stories that we tell, we talk about our past as if it is something that is immutable. And really, what we're talking about when we're talking about our past is our experience, our interpretation. And I see this over and over again with clients where we incorporate experience and responses to experience and interpretations of experience. And we take those interpretations from the past, usually, and we act as though they're true. And we have all kinds of evidence of them being true. We have other people that might corroborate our our story, our recounting. We can often have evidence from the broader world of our story. And when I'm talking about story, I'm talking about aspects of stories such as nobody does anything for nothing, and the world's a dangerous place, and I'm to this or not enough that, or um my parents were this way, that way, or the other way, or life is hard, and or whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, or I for a long time there I had life sucks and then you die, believe it or not. So I'm laughing because of the contrast, right? And so these stories, we talk about stories a lot because really life is story. And that's how we contextualize our experience. So when we when we look at our past, we bring those stories into the present. So we have our stories about our childhood, our stories about growing up, about stories about our hardships or our triumphs, stories about why we are the way we are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you've been around here for any time at all, you've heard me say over and over again, be careful, be full of care in curating your stories. Why? Because that's our experience. And the thing is that it all happens right here, right now. Like this is the only moment. This is all there is. This is this moment and this moment and this moment. And what's happening is that we take these stories from the past, not even recognizing that most of the time they're not even our stories. They're often stories that have been inherited, that we have inherited from the time we were little and had no discernment to know that it wasn't reality, that it wasn't true, that it wasn't fact, but that it was a way that we propagate ourselves, to our children, to our social environment, where we indoctrinate, right? We indoctrinate through school, we indoctrinate through religious institutions, we indoctrinate through family, we indoctrinate through social media. We're trained into thinking a certain way. And particularly when we're really young and impressionable, we don't have the discernment to be able to choose, even because we're not aware that there's any reason to question what's being given to us. And a lot of us don't do that as adults. We're still subject to the same kind of programming as adults, right? That's the power of media to be influencing us, conditioning and programming us. So let's just talk about this notion of time. If you can allow yourself to play with this idea, it's mind bending and it can be a catalyst to profound change. So I'll just preface it by saying that. And it's mind bending. So that's the caution, is to realize that who we are, our past, whatever we're bringing to who we are from our past, we're recreating in this moment. The story of the past is something that we are regenerating in this moment over and over and over. And I was just thinking of the line, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. And that's what most of us do, because we are invested in our stories about who we are, who we've been, what life is like, all the realities that we've been indoctrinated to. What's true, how the universe works, We're often taught that, what uh, we're taught moral codes, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing is that we're taking whatever that indoctrination has been and whatever the lenses that we have experienced our experience through, and we then regenerate it in this moment. So if I'm telling the story of how hard my life was, for example, or how bad my relationships were or something, I'm recreating that in this moment. And yes, we can see patterns. I'm not denying patterns. I'm just inviting you to sort of step into this and see what happens to your brain, because it kind of goes like, what the heck is going on here? There's a period of disorientation, which then can allow for a release of like a freedom from the identification with these stories. So in the name of what we imagine to be truth or honesty, we keep recreating these stories about ourselves, about other people in our lives, about our interactions. And we hold grudges, we hold ideas about people, about the nature of the universe. And the big part that we want to look at is that we then act accordingly. We act as though it's true. So we act as though we are too much, too little, too whatever. We live through that experience because we're believing that that story is true. Now, those stories truly, really, if you look, they are often inherited. Not just the stories, but behaviors and reactions and beliefs. They're often inherited, meaning we never even got to question them. That was just given to us. Here's reality. And we if you look at your family and you look at how you might be similar to your parents, there may be genetic components to that, but I'm talking about worldview and view of self. And, it's interesting because we adopt gestures, vocal traits, all kinds of patterning from our family environment. You can often tell that siblings are siblings because of the way they speak. You can often tell that kids are the kids of their parents because they share a lot of traits. And I'm not just talking about appearance, but behavioral traits. The interest, it's making me think about studies that they did with twins that were separated at birth. And there's often a lot of parity in the behavior of the twins, which I think that science has tried to ascribe, is I'm not sure if that's the right word, trying to assign to genetics. And I wonder if it's actually genetics or if it's some kind of energetic field that we carry, some kind of resonance in our being that we carry, that that carries these familial generational patterns. But regardless, if we get back to this idea of past and future, we are creating and recreating them in the moment. And if you've ever played Whisper Down the Lane, you know that through these various iterations, things change, right? So we think the story that we're telling is the truth, but over time, it's mutating with each retelling, and um and we don't typically take into account the source of those impressions that gave us that story in the first place. So oftentimes those stories are are originating from a little child, like a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old that interpreted certain events that then brought that forward into life as their experience and as their truth and as their story. And I see this in so many of us. I mean, I, we have we have stories that are shaping us that we're still holding, even if we're not still verbally telling them. They're stories that we're holding into this moment that are shaping us in this moment, but they could have been stories told by a 5-year-old who was really frightened by a certain situation. And that story has been has been instrumental in shaping the lens through which we experience life. And it's there's no shame or blame here about this dynamic. It happens. It's really pretty much something that has happened to all of us, unless we've come in as self-realized. And I guess there's some people who do, rarely, but these stories dictate the lens through which we experience life. They're coming into the present. We hold them not always in our conscious mind, pretty much regularly in our bodies, even though we may not have access to them. We typically have access to them through our other than conscious mind that is regenerating those stories moment by moment and by moment. Now, the significance of this conversation, the importance of this conversation is that when we recognize that the past is a story, the future is a story, we can understand that we can actually change the past. In fact, we are changing the past with each retelling of that story anyway, because we're not remembering it in the way that it happened, we're interpreting it. So our interpretation is what is perpetuating it. And we're modifying it all the time. We might forget certain details. Well, if we're forgetting certain details, then we're not remembering the story, at least consciously. We might be emotionally holding the story. And part of the work that I do with the core connection work with clients is to be unearthing that emotional memory as well. But it's being created or accessed, remembered, whatever, in this moment. And when we recognize that, we can allow ourselves to recreate those stories. So I can tell you that one of the most powerful processes to be able to do with folks who experienced a childhood trauma is to go back to that time and provide that kid with what they needed. Maybe they needed somebody to tell them, you know what? It's going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Or I'm here with you and I love you and we can go through this together. Now, as a kid, you didn't necessarily experience that, but in our recreating of that past story, we really truly can modify it. Now, here's the clincher, is that our minds, our intelligence or our consciousness does not distinguish between something that is quote unquote real and something that is vividly imagined. So how about that? Just sit with that for a second. We don't distinguish between something that is quote unquote real and something that is vividly imagined. And therefore, when we go back to look at our past, we can actually recreate it where we have an intervention that provides something that remembered self needed, because it's always happening here right now. And so what this allows us to do, hopefully, is in recognizing that it's all story, maybe we can release some of the identification that we have with that story as true, and realize that we can rewrite it. We can rewrite it at any time, truly at any moment. In fact, we're just rewriting it with mostly the same words every time, because we have some kind of notion that it's true, but it's an interpretation. It reminds me of the story of the blind people and the elephant. And one person was touching the tail of the elephant and explaining that this creature was rope-like. Another was touching the trunk of the elephant and finding it to be kind of snake-like. Another was touching the hoof of the elephant, and you get the idea. They all had different experiences. It was the same elephant. It was all one elephant, but not according to each of their experiences. There's no way that they would put it together to be this one unified animal, right? It's the same thing with the shadows on the wall of the cave. The shadows, if you're in the cave and all you see is the shadows that are cast, you think that that's the reality, when in reality there's something casting that shadow, right? And so the stories that we tell from the past and the stories that we make up and project into the future are those shadows. And the stories that we make in the present are also stories, interpretations. And when we can recognize that, when we can hold those stories with open hand, when we can allow ourselves to be present to the unknown, to recognize that we don't really have the capability to perceive beyond our stories, that all of our perception is story, maybe then it can free us up to make better stories, to create different interpretations, to open up new opportunities, to actually realize that we're not bound and limited by those interpretations of events, and that those stories, we can archive a lot of those stories if we want to. when we realize they're just stories. It's like the spell casting that we've talked about. You know, they're stories, they're spells, they're lenses, whatever. The world looks different through gray lenses than it does through rose-colored glasses. And it's just a matter of changing the lens. So that's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to please like, follow, and share Enlightened World Network and me. The links are in the description. And as always, it's a tremendous pleasure and privilege to spend this time together musing on what it is to be here and human. So until next time, so much love to you.